The French language was still commonly spoken along the Mississippi, and many officials of the government of Spanish Louisiana, headquartered at St. Louis, were in fact French. St. Louis, founded a century earlier by Robert Cavelier de La Salle, showed the benefits of location in commanding the trade of the Missouri, Illinois, and Mississippi rivers. "It is fast improving and will soon be a large place," Austin wrote upon arrival. The prospect piqued his desire to see the mines he had come so far to examine. Francois Val, the commandant of the district, was at St. Genevieve on the river a day's ride south. Austin went there and made such a good case for himself that Val provided fresh horses for the final 40 miles. Knowing the mining trade, Austin could see almost at a glance that the tales he had heard of Spanish lead deposits weren't exaggerated. The ore was close to the surface and was of better quality than any I have ever seen. The deposit was called Mina Breton, after its discoverer, a French soldier named Breton. Austin was more impressed by the recent history of the place, starting with the production just that last summer of 400,000 pounds of lead, and by the inefficiency of the miners' techniques, which meant that the deposits would be even more productive in the hands of someone who knew what he was doing. Observation and brief experiment convinced Austin that he could triple the mine's output. Returning to St. Genevieve, Austin presented a plan to Val whereby Spain would grant Austin land and mineral rights in exchange for his commitment to develop the mines and furnish Spain with the lead shot and sheets its army and navy required. Val endorsed Austin's plan and sent it south to his superiors in New Spain. Austin returned to Virginia to await the verdict of the Spanish government. 6 months later, it arrived. Austin was awarded less land than he had asked for, 1 league instead of 16, but given that he had requested far more land than he needed, he was happy to accept Spain's terms. In the summer of 1798, Moses Austin led his family and followers out of Virginia and into the mountains of Tennessee. They went to establish a mining operation at Mina Breton, but also a colony, since nothing in the way of a settled community existed there. Moses had never expected the frontier to be for the faint-hearted, and he proceeded to develop the lead mine according to his initial blueprint. He built high-efficiency furnaces, which recovered far more metal from each ton of ore than his predecessors had managed. Within several years, his operation achieved an annual production of 800,000 pounds, making Austin a very wealthy man. In 1810, he estimated his net value at $190,000. But nothing stayed the same for long on the frontier, not even the location of the frontier. Within half a decade of his arrival, Austin found himself once more on American soil. In 1800, France's ambitious new ruler, Napoleon Bonaparte, extorted Louisiana back from Spain, and in 1803, after a sudden change of plans, he sold it to the United States. In at least one sense, American sovereignty posed a threat to Austin's position. His control of Mina Breton rested on Spanish authority. Whether the Americans, who were notorious for ignoring titles granted under predecessor regimes, would accept his control was an open question. Austin's deeper problems derived from the tumultuous state of the American economy. During Thomas Jefferson's second term as president, the serial fighting between Britain and France became a battle to the death. In their extremity, both sides preyed on American shipping. Jefferson judged that American security required keeping clear of Europe's wars, and he persuaded Congress to embargo trade with Europe. The embargo proved an economic disaster, plunging American seaports into depression. The lead market collapsed, leaving Moses Austin with tons of metal he couldn't unload and stacks of bonds he couldn't redeem. By 1818, he was compelled to put the Mina Breton up for sale. Potential buyers, however, guessed that if Moses Austin couldn't make lead pay, neither could they, and the mine went begging. Austin's debts continued to grow even as his ability to repay them diminished. The end came in March 1820, when the sheriff arrested and jailed him for non-payment. Austin won his freedom, but it held no pleasure for him. To remain in a country where I had enjoyed wealth in a state of poverty I could not submit to, he recalled. 2 decades earlier, Moses Austin had started a new life in a new country. He was convinced he must do so again. Yet there was a difference to the moving this time. The trek to Spanish Louisiana had been a hopeful journey by a young man in the prime of confidence and energy. This move was the desperate act of a man drowning in failure and debt. The region to which Austin pinned his hopes was Texas. A treaty concluded just several months earlier had apparently marked the end of a decade and a half of bickering between the United States and Spain over the border between their respective territories. Jefferson had asserted that the southwestern boundary of America's Louisiana Purchase was the Rio Grande, but he did little to defend this interpretation, having his hands full with the British and the French on the high seas. His successor, James Madison, had even more trouble with the British, culminating in the War of 1812. Meanwhile, American friction with Spain focused on Florida, which General Andrew Jackson of Tennessee, the military hero of the war and a rising political force in the West, and many others demanded be added to the American domain. By 1819, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams was willing to surrender whatever claim the United States might have had to Texas in exchange for a tidying up of the Florida question and other details between the United States and Spain. Moses Austin was that rare American west of the Mississippi who wanted Spain to keep Texas, and so he was pleased to learn that the border between Texas and the United States had been preserved, and he prepared to exploit it. He would travel to Spanish Texas, as he had traveled to Spanish Louisiana 2 decades earlier, and he would present a plan for developing the country. He assumed that the same incentives applied now as it applied then, that the Spanish authorities, eager to increase the population and prosperity of their district, would welcome the immigration of responsible, productive individuals and families. For his part in arranging this boon, he hoped to be compensated in land, of which Texas had far more than the Spanish could ever use themselves. Austin set off in the spring of 1820, traveling south to Little Rock, Arkansas, where his son Stephen, now an adult, was living, and where Moses contracted malaria. He spent the summer and part of the autumn regaining his strength. Not till November did he resume his journey, riding a horse borrowed from Stephen, carrying $50 from Stephen, and accompanied by one of Stephen's slaves, a young man named Richmond, who rode a borrowed mule. Moses and Richmond proceeded south to Natchitoches on the Red River in the state of Louisiana. For more than a century, the 100 miles between Natchitoches and Nacogdoches, the first town on the Texas side of the Sabine, had been a no-man's land. Indeed, the entire 500 miles to San Antonio de Bejar, the capital of Texas, was nearly deserted. Austin's reception at Bejar, as the inhabitants called the town of 2000, made him regret he had come. The governor, Antonio Martinez, refused to listen to his proposal. His superior, Commandant Joaquin de Arredondo, had made it clear that no aid whatsoever was to be extended to any Americans, and Martinez was loath to cross Arredondo, a man of terrifying reputation. Finally, denying Austin even the hospitality of one night in town, he ordered him to leave Bejar immediately. Austin had no choice. The town was small enough that his every move was public knowledge. He found Richmond and told him to water, feed, and saddle the horse and mule for departure by dusk. Walking across the plaza of Bejar that waning afternoon in December 1820, Austin encountered a person he had met many years before in New Orleans, Baron de Bastrop. Bastrop listened as Austin told his story. Austin explained that he hoped to bring 300 American families to Texas and to be rewarded in land for doing so. Confident of his persuasiveness if he could only get a hearing with Governor Martinez, he asked Bastrop for help. Bastrop arranged for Austin to stay in San Antonio over Christmas, just 2 days away. The day after Christmas, Bastrop took Austin back to see Governor Martinez. In his proposal, Austin spoke of the obvious intention of the Spanish king that Texas prosper, and he presented himself as the agent of 300 families who, with the same purpose in view, are desirous of seeing the intention of His Majesty fulfilled. Austin's 300 families were at this point merely notional, but he contended that they would be exemplary colonists. Just why Martinez now found Austin's argument persuasive is hard to say. Martinez shared Austin's views about the value of immigrants, and the governor couldn't foresee immigrants arriving under circumstances more favorable than those Austin outlined. The proposal which he is making, Martinez declared in a letter forwarding Austin's petition to Commandant Arredondo, is, in my opinion, the only one which is bound to provide for the increase in prosperity in his settlement and even others in this province. Otherwise, I look upon the appearance of such a favorable development as quite remote.